I'd like to call to order the January 20th, 2016 meeting of the RDA. Would you please take the roll call?
Belter. Birmingham.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Hintz.
Here.
Lasky. Pearson. Stam.
Here.
Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Motion for a
I'll move its
Second.
approval as distributed.
Second?
any discussion?
And then we just have to remove the
Well,
Audit?
audit by staff.
Yeah, we're just,
staff is withdrawing the audit.
yeah, we forgot to send the audit, so we'll just remove it and,
Put it in
Do
the
it next
one.
time?
Yes.
Okay. I'll
Sorry
move the
about that.
approval as distributed minus the audit.
Second.
I'll second.
Discussion, public comments? Roll, please.
Then it's just a voice vote.
It's been a while since I've done this. I did it once before.
All
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? New business?
I move approval of 1601 Millers Bay Neighborhood Plan.
Second.
Discussion?
Action, explanation?
Sure.
Sure.
Recall the city of Oshkosh, and we're working very closely with several neighborhoods and neighborhood organizations. If you recall, Middle Village was the first neighborhood that we created a neighborhood plan, and Millers Bay is the second. We have Associate Planner Elizabeth Williams, who's worked on this project, and I'm sure she'd be happy to give you a short synopsis as to what the plan is, and we'd be able to answer any questions you have for you.
Do you want me to go to the podium or is it okay to sit at the table?
you can sit
We'll
it.
let
Okay,
her
well,
Great.
be comfortable.
Yeah,
but
thank
no elbows on the table.
you. I can do that. All right. As Alan said, this is the second plan that we've adopted for the city. Millers Bay neighborhood, the boundaries are Murdoch Avenue on the north. On the east, it's Menominee Drive or Menominee Park. South is New York Avenue, and on the west is Hazel Street. So there's about 300 parcels within that neighborhood boundary. The plan has various different components of it, including a vision statement that was drafted by the residents, and then it goes into, I believe it's 9 different elements that kind of coincide with the city's comprehensive plan. And then under each one of those elements, the residents have developed goals and objectives, which were developed through discussions. We did a neighborhood-wide survey to the area, which had a very good response rate. I think there were over 150 responses to that survey, which is pretty good considering we don't typically get a lot of response to resident engagement of this type. So it's a very active association. They're already working on various projects, including enhancements to Emmeline Cook Elementary School. They've also worked with the city on enhancements to the Washington Triangle, which is located just outside of their boundary. So if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I hope that you approve the plan as it's written.
I have a few comments. First, I was impressed by the plan. You know, it's comprehensive. There probably is far more in it that can't be done, but it enables people to follow a lot of projects. I think that, you know, as I look at neighborhood plans, and not simply in Oshkosh, but in other places, the success of the plan is in having active people and having leadership. And I was glad to see the one note in there about being concerned about recruiting and sustaining the leadership. This is a pretty upscale part of the city. You know, the issues there are not the same issues that they are in some of the really older neighborhoods. But I think it's important, you know, whenever you have people who are actively involved and want to do something, to encourage and work with them. So this is a positive step.
This is just a second of many. That map over there shows where the neighborhood association.
What you're doing, yeah.
Now, probably a couple more that are going to be coming on, but so you can see we've got a wide range of different types of housing, neighborhood types
Yeah.
that we'll be working with, and it's
Yeah.
because there's a lot of different types of neighborhoods in Oshkosh, and we want to serve all of them equally.
Yeah. Well, I would, my sense is that in terms of the city-community partnership, that what happens in Miller's Bay is going to be different from some of the other areas, and I would anticipate that city involvement is going to be greater in some of the more modest and older neighborhoods. I know Mayor Cummins has paid a lot of attention to that, and I hope that we can sustain those efforts and expand on them.
I believe there's one forming in West Haven, correct, which is our
All
first
right, yeah,
move across the highway, to something in South Park.
interesting.
Yep, it's 44th, it's centered around 44th Parallel Park, which is off of Maricopa Drive in West Haven Circle area. So they're currently going through the organizational process to be a recognized association. So we're hoping that they'll accomplish that here in the next few months or so.
Interesting. Anything in the central city north of Merritt?
Yeah, Euro House is one called the.
Let's see, where are we? Are we in the
You
big
call them
greenhouse?
You call them
Menominee
South.
South.
Oh, yeah, all right, it doesn't quite make it all the way to Middle Village, but it's,
No.
I've had some discussions with the residents that live in that kind of gap between Middle Village and Menominee South. So we're encouraged with
Yeah.
the potential of something forming there.
working on it, yeah, good.
And Middle Village is vastly different than
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Much so.
almost any other neighborhood or neighborhood.
I think for Miller's Bay, it's really about sustaining the quality of life that they currently have in the neighborhood, the quality housing, and making sure as residents transition, because it's relatively a newer established neighborhood. It was developed in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
so maybe 50s, going back a little further. But, you know,
You're
that's...
getting warm.
Yeah, I'm getting closer. But yeah, so I think they're just concerned about the transition as the long-term residents move out, making sure that they continue to establish themselves as a healthy, desirable place in the community.
And I might add, they're very active. I think that the offer was accepted on our house, the one that we bought in that neighborhood, by about 10 minutes before we started getting emails from them saying, please join. So,
Yeah.
It's a very active.
Ruth McGinley knocking
group.
on your
McGinley,
door,
yes.
right, yeah.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to visit their website, and it was very, very impressive.
Cool.
If anyone for public comments, and there is no one, so any additional comments by the RDA members? If not, I'll call the question. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Pardon?
This one is a roll.
Yep.
What is a
Roll
roll?
call?
Yep.
You take the roll, please.
Birmingham?
You have to note my abstention because I live in the neighborhood.
Okay. Hintz?
Aye.
Stam?
Aye.
Cummings?
Aye.
Carried 3, abstained 1.
(1602) Approve continuing urban green space use northeast corner of Central Street and West Parkway Avenue.
Move to approve it?
Second. Discussion by,
Steve.
pardon?
Are both of these garden areas?
Well, we have some pictures that we can show you, if we
You
could
do, yeah.
quick.
Because they both reference community gardens.
So this was before pictures, and then, no, I'm not getting it. Don't know, do you want to talk about it at all?
Sure, I can talk about it a little bit. So this particular site on the corner of Central and Parkway will be utilized as a community garden. There was an event to build the covered seating area that you see here. We collaborated with Habitat for Humanity and the neighborhood volunteers on the construction of that site, and then the contractor has since come in and started installing the brick pathways and the planter beds. It's our expectation that that will be completed in the spring. Unfortunately, Mother Nature took its course and the snow fell, so we weren't able to, the contractors weren't able to complete the project in this calendar year. So there has been notable progress on the site, and residents have been involved since we broke ground on that project.
Appropriate for us to be continuing this on a yearly basis when we're putting in what look like fairly permanent additions to the property there?
I'm not sure there's any limit other than wanting to come back to RDA to get your authorization to continue. If you want to, are you saying go
Well,
longer
you
with
know,
the
I
approval?
mean, I would be loath to not continue it when we're putting in permanent, what look like pretty permanent improvements there. I don't know, I just find things that have fairly permanent improvements that officially live on a year-to-year permission a little strange.
This is part of the Middle Village neighborhood plan, is what I remember, so the long-term expectation is
Yeah, I know.
for this to
It's-
be that type of.
I've
use.
got a long-term expectations, but I just find it a little strange that with those long-term expectations and even putting in this, that we should do an annual approval on something like
Bring
this.
up a good point, because I think the conditional use permit basically runs forever until that use ends. At least on the zoning side of the permission.
The conditional use permit, condition number 1 indicates that approval will be required on a yearly basis from the RDA.
You know, and we own that
That-
land, as I understand.
Yes.
Okay, but is this one of those, we're using this for this community neighborhood green space until something else comes along? Was that sticking in the back of my head somewhere?
That's a non-conforming lot, isn't it?
I mean, we didn't approve this structure, did we?
Yes.
We did approve it.
I thought it was continue the use of this until and if we were able to play enough Monopoly to get a big enough
Parcel to
conglomerate
redevelop.
to redevelop it, is what I kind of thought, why we were asked.
But I think it's going to take a while to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's take a long time to be able to do that.
When I went to the conditional use permit and the plan development, that went through Plan Commission and Council, and they're the ones who put the yearly basis requirement on there. We could go back and ask them to revise that, go out 5 years, or pick a number at this point in time, because
Well, I just want to be sure that everybody's on the same page, because I think that, Middle Village is making some assumptions about this being a long-term thing. I mean, obviously, there is an investment in, at least a shelter of some kind that probably has got some concrete foundations on it. But yet, we're treating this like we treated the garden over on Jefferson, in terms of what its legal status is. And I just would hate to have us get into a tussle about longer-term expectations on this property. Doesn't mean John brings up a good point, that, may have been assumptions about, how some of the commissioners viewed this.
it certainly is possible that we'd acquire more properties right around that location, so it could make itself redevelopable like Jefferson eventually became after 10 years of acquisitions.
What if then if we simply put it as a consent agenda item once a year, unless there's something that needs to be brought to our attention? Because that way you don't have to go back and ask who was it, the Plan Commission or who was it that put the yearly review on it?
Plan Commission.
Plan Commission. to do that, and we can just review it as a consent agenda item, unless you come to us and say, hey, something else is coming up, we can buy enough properties to do something.
I would
Good
agree with
idea, too, to
that.
see what the condition is in 12 months and 24 months, how it is being maintained, hopefully by the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
As I recall, the properties going east, I mean, it's a real mess of lot lines. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So the acquisition of properties, as you said, 10 years would be, I think, a miracle, trying to sort out the property.
Maybe I'm making a bigger deal about the structure that's being built there, in terms of what the expectations are. Is that a community garden structure? I mean, is there any concrete walkway that's being put in there? What's happening?
They have brick paver pathways
pavers.
there, yep. And then,
Is that covered under the definition of a community garden?
I'm not sure I've seen the community garden definition. We characterize it more as the urban green space, and I think it would be covered under that. I think the community garden part would only be a piece of that. It's not going to be the entire site.
Well, and when I hear community garden, I think I go there and raise my tomatoes kind of community garden. This is just more of a community green space that has some educational gardens, I think I saw in the drawing.
Correct, correct. Mhm. Yeah, to my recollection, they were going to use it more for education for children, showing them how to plant things, because we're doing lower beds so that the kids can get in there and plant their seeds and see what comes up.
It's more a demonstration. If you want to
And more herbs and stuff like that.
Well, I will not beat this horse anymore, but I except to say that I think that it is important to communicate with the board of Middle Village about exactly what the status is and what possible future expectations might be, and to clarify what their vision is. Because, I mean, I can see that this, I'm all for it, and I could see this as a permanent green space in the area, and I'm guessing that people involved in it may see it as a long-term green space, but there's always the possibility that there will be some other property coming available, and the RDA might say, hey, we want an RFP to see what's going to happen, and they're going to say, oh, wait a minute, that's our green space. Anyway.
Well, and that's all the more reason to keep it on the agenda every year, probably. So that we're not creating an
I just want to know
unrealistic
what their assumptions are. I mean, I think that if I had gone in with a community garden idea and knew that it was just going to be renewable every year, I doubt I would have put pavers and a nice pagoda in there. I mean, I don't think that's the action of people who think that this is just a year-to-year kind of a deal in terms of what their thoughts are about it.
How do you think they feel about it? I mean, do they understand that this is a year-to-year tenancy sort of thing?
it was a condition that they were aware of when it went to council, and they knew that if for some reason maintenance wasn't taking place or they weren't fulfilling the conditions that were put on the site by council, that it would go away. So I think that they're under the impression that if they continue to maintain that the site would, and RDA doesn't see a different use for it, that they would be able to continue to
Including the
utilize site.
improvements,
Right.
which are, of a more permanent nature.
Correct.
Do those improvements get donated by Habitat?
No, they were actually funded through the city's Great Neighborhoods program.
Wait a minute.
What's that? The labor was donated,
Hold
correct,
on.
yes.
Register my concerns, at least.
public comments, there's no public hearing again, additional discussion by the RDA. Marge, please take the roll.
Birmingham,
Aye.
Hintz,
Aye.
Stam,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
carried 4.
60-03, approve continuing urban green space use southeast corner of Ida Avenue and Franklin Street, which is about a block from the site you just saw. My own neighborhood.
Same thing here.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a community garden, that's an investment in a park.
Well, this one is a green space.
But doesn't this one have a
Well-
walkway?
It still has some walkway.
Who
and
put the walkway in?
Part of the city, yeah, through the Great Neighborhoods program, yep. Which was
So
approved by
what's the
council.
legal status of that?
Well, I think it's that we own a lot that somebody else improved for us, frankly, is the legal status of it, right? We being the RDA.
Without us knowing that that was happening?
I think we approved that, too.
Yes,
Did we?
the
But
plan-
before
We did,
yes.
okay.
RDA approved it.
Looks very nice.
In fact, I think RDA approved all these conditions before we actually,
It to council. Mhm.
I think we had all the plans as part of that plan development CUP application that Plan Commission and City Council also had to approve.
Our understanding that the neighborhood uses it substantially. Yes.
Had a number of they've had a number of events at the green space, and so they do utilize it. And there are usually kids playing on it. I drive past this on my way home from work every day, and there's definitely kids out there. There was a group of Daisy Scouts that had a meeting there, so it's definitely being utilized for its intended purpose.
And if they
I
didn't
understand
do
your
that?
concern that
Yeah, I mean, why not turn it into a permanent pocket park? And just acknowledge what it really is.
But,
Everyone hates that.
but quite frankly, then the city
Yeah.
would have to do the sidewalks and mow it and do all those things, correct?
And we want to keep that prospect possible that we could redevelop that as part of a larger space. So it's a good temporary use, and I don't know if that's for 1 year or 10 years or whatever years it's going to be.
It's going to be a long time.
It is going to be a long time, but I can
Very well
also,
could be.
I can also hear the hue and cry when we amass enough property and then say, oh, by the way, we're putting this out for bids and asking somebody to build something else here. I can hear the complaints of the neighbors who are used to using it at that time.
My expectation is we'll have some kind of public open space as part of the approved plan for that as well.
Anyway, right, okay.
Similar to what we're doing on Grove Street, where we're looking at creating that open space for community gardens and space again. But that's too far in the future for me to speculate.
Any public comments? There's someone from the public. Additional discussion by the RDA. I will mention, having grown up in a neighborhood a few decades ago, the only place we had to play was either on the train tracks back then, the old Chase Roofing Company buildings, or Festonville's funeral home, gravel parking lot. So this is a nice addition to a very, very old, part of it's historic too, neighborhood, correct?
This is in the historic district, yep.
Morgan homes are further down the street, so. Call the question.
Birmingham,
Aye.
Hintz,
Aye.
Lasky, Stam,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
carried 5-0.
Next, we have discussion of redevelopment authority's role in property acquisition, housing, and neighborhood projects.
Yes. The city is looking to become more involved with projects, potential acquisitions and rehabilitations of properties that are substandard around the city. some in our target areas, and at this point, we don't have a specific body that we take those types of projects to. I'm not sure if the block grant funds typically approved by the city for acquisition and rehabilitation. We could, under the Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative, bring those types of projects to the RDA to talk about this is the acquisition price, this is the potential rehabilitation price, and this is what we think we could sell the rehabilitated property for on the open market. And I think we've seen that work in other communities that the mayor has led contingents to see how the other communities do that. And I think Racine specifically
was one.
said
We've talked them
they
quite a
use the
bit.
RDA for this type of activity. So I think we just wanted to find out what the RDA thought about more participation in not the typical blight removal downtown redevelopment project, but more scattered site in the residential neighborhoods that we started getting into with the Middle Village, but getting into it more and more throughout the city. Would that be a good characterization of?
In target areas too, it's not just a house here or a house.
Yes, but it could be in any of those neighborhood areas, and as time goes by, I expect there's going to be more of those.
We're trying to develop a formula that if we buy the house for X, how much do we invest into it to bring it up to a comparable price for that neighborhood? So we may say it doesn't work, we should just maybe tear it down, or yes, it does work. We're not talking putting granite countertops in these houses. It's an update of an older home. See?
Is this being handled by staff now with recommendations, or?
Usually they're owner occupied right now, and in this case, the RDA could potentially own it, then rehabilitate it, and then sell it. So it's not really a model I'm aware of that. Has the city done this in the past?
No. We usually
Not in the last 5 years, at least.
purchase and demolish and then resell it, the vacant lot. But, yeah, so this would be a different model for Oshkosh.
We toured some of the neighborhoods in Racine, and they've got a whole different set of problems from us, but they've done some nice work in these homes in these neighborhoods. And if they try to retain the character of the home, again, they're older homes, like we're faced with a lot of older homes, built probably prior to World War I.
What's my question? The city acts as the general contractor in this instance?
Yes, yes, we would.
And what are the, is the city currently doing that role?
The city doesn't act as a general contractor. The owner hires the contractor.
I guess, what are the qualifications to put the city in this position? Because, as opposed to the open market of flipping houses, investors coming in to purchase the properties for reasonable prices, put the investment in themselves with their expertise and their experience, and then putting them on the market. If we make the properties attractive,
Right.
then is the city qualified to be really the general contractor on projects like these?
Well, we would have our housing rehab specialist go out and inspect the property, who's very familiar with the codes and all of the building codes. And, because he does our housing rehab properties right now.
On behalf of owner occupied.
Right. So, and then based on that, we would bid the project out to the contractors that we are currently working with for our the owner-occupied rehab program, and potentially other contractors as well who would be interested in working on the program. And then I'm guessing like the loan committee or a review committee would review those bids to decide on the contractor. And then, yes, we would oversee the project from start to finish.
And how is the need determined? How is this determined as a need? Or is this just a discussion of is there interest? Are there not local investors doing these projects?
I think the difference is a lot of the local, you used the term flip, that's what's happening. If we have control, we can get the house close to the way it was designed and built. If you look at all these neighborhoods, the homes are basically, go down Jackson, it's a street full of porches. You can tell the home that's had the porch ripped off. It kind of jars you visually. So if we own it, we have control over what does happen to the exterior. Interior, it might be a condition. You do got it because of that age home, there was probably a bathroom, most cases on the second floor. Some, for a weird reason, have it on the first floor. So I think we would look at, do we try to save the interior, or do we just got to configure it for modern needs, where people don't want dining rooms? That's it.
You know, part of that issue of ripping a porch off a house may be structural. It may be the fact that putting that money in would be too much investment into a resale for the property. Again, not knowing, I'm not opposed to it, but I just don't know, you know, if there's a market for this that exists, why the city get involved?
I think we started looking at it also, and Elizabeth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that in some of the neighborhoods that staff has been working with, there are a lot of foreclosures that are sitting, deteriorating, because they're being abandoned. And we're trying to keep those neighborhoods moving forward and progressing, and so that people are moving back into them. When they see these deteriorated homes, they don't want to move into those areas. So I think there is a need to some degree, and we're trying to address that.
What would the budget dollars look like on an annual basis for projects like this?
Have we gotten that far?
We've set aside, it's, the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative is about a $500,000 a year budget, but that includes like owner-occupied rehab loans that we help or provide to property owners. I think we had set aside about $200,000 as a combination of CDBG and Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative funding to actually acquire properties. We haven't utilized any money yet because we haven't identified any properties this year to do so. But I guess that's what we were thinking of. But we're not talking about a large-scale opportunity, you know, large-scale operations at this point, unless, you know, that's the direction this board and the council wants to go. But I think that it's really an opportunity to take advantage of maybe tax foreclosures or properties that we as a city get access to before investors. And in these neighborhoods, we're seeing a lot of the foreclosures then turn into rental properties where the goals of the plans are really to maintain the owner occupancy in the neighborhood. So again, it's just an opportunity to trend the market in the direction that residents that we've engaged are hoping to see it go. So really, it's a market intervention in some areas where others it wouldn't be necessary.
Steve?
First, I think it's a great goal for maintaining neighborhoods. Simply a technical question. Would the RDA be simply the review board in terms of looking at costs and benefits, or would we actually be the body acquiring the property in behalf of the city, or both?
I think we could just about set it up any way we want.
Yeah.
Probably whatever's the RDA would be most comfortable with.
Okay. Yeah.
Get down into the dirty details as to even reviewing the bids and deciding what kind of cabinet to put in the property if you wanted to get that kind of detail.
Sort of.
Yeah.
You let Elizabeth do it.
Or set a limit as to how much that's being.
Oh, well,
Again,
I
talked about just how detailed you could possibly get, but it could go from the broad spectrum of this is the property that should be acquired, here's how much we think it's going to cost to rehab, this is how much we think we could sell it for based on the comparable sales in the neighborhood. If we can break even, that would be great, and that's one of the reasons the private sector doesn't do it, is that I wouldn't be expecting our projects to break records and profits for that type of thing. I'll be happy if it breaks even, frankly. So we can do that on another project then. So,
We'll know that going in.
yes.
We'll run the numbers and we'll say, all right, we're going to make $1, we're going to lose $1, we're going to break even, but we'll do that before we begin the project. So there's no surprises when we're done.
I'd like to have you continue to pursue the discussion and obviously try to break out alternatives for us, because I think that there are some things that probably would be very appropriate for the RDA and probably some things that wouldn't be so appropriate. So if we can just continue to move along those lines, yeah.
Certainly the legal aspects and the overall financing piece, I think, would be more appropriate for the RDA when it comes down to picking the paint. I'm probably not sure that needs to come back to the RDA
Right,
for
yeah.
something like that. But I think the mayor's right, and one of the goals we would have for this program is to architecturally rehabilitate them so it does match more the traditional, the original design.
And you can do it with modern materials
Oh,
to
absolutely.
replicate the look of a porch. I'm redoing my porch now, and I chose for tax credits, historic tax credits, I'll use wood. Figure at my age, who cares? I'll be dead before it rots, and not incur the cost of synthetics. But there's ways to get that look back with modern materials for a long last. But I think what we really want to do is stabilize these neighborhoods. We want to get people to move into these neighborhoods rather than fleeing to the West Havens, to build our tax base. And the term we keep using is equity protection. And I'll use my mother's example, living on West Parkway for 40 years. The neighborhood got so bad, we just said, you're out of here. You're moving. And we were just happy to get rid of the house. So a lot of people in that situation, they think this is their nest egg if they have to go to a retirement home. They find out because of neighborhood deterioration, it's gone, or it's been substantially reduced. And that it's a snowball. The neighborhood keeps going down and down and down, and then it's affecting our tax base and everything else, so.
I understand the reason to want to rehab, but it would seem to me that, here's a house that's available on foreclosure. Let's see what we can do to turn it around and perhaps make a profit at it. If there's no profit to be had, that essentially eliminates the private investor, the flipper, the person who's out doing that. But this is also some of what Habitat for Humanity might be involved with in some ways, I would assume, and NeighborWorks. Once NeighborWorks gets back and going the way they intended it to go to start with, would be interested in doing things like this too, I presume, correct?
Exactly.
Buying, improving, and selling. So I think we could do well for the city by being the sort of the point of contact on that, and your office can make a recommendation as to really what ought to happen with it to this board. In other words, if we said, hey, here's a good deal that we can turn around at a little profit or at no profit, but at a break even, where would we get the money from to buy it? And that's probably going to come partly from Great Neighbors, or
Right.
but it's not RDA money that we're sitting on right now.
Correct.
That's there for those purposes, correct?
Correct.
And so the RDA is kind of becoming the plan commission with a heart and soul, right? Soft plan. That was a little strong. The soft plan commission.
It was, I thought it was the other way around, right?
Conceptually, it works well in Racine, which has, very high unemployment, high crime, and some neighborhoods as old, if not older than ours, in the central city that the ones we saw, they've done a nice job on.
Well, and is this specific to Central City, or is this open borders?
I would expect it's going to be more central city like our neighborhood plans are developing to this point. Middle Village, Stevens Park, River East, those types of neighborhoods is my
So
expectation for
it
this
would-
type of activity.
It would exclude some properties potentially, or some areas in the
I
city?
guess we haven't talked about that specifically. Usually the ones that we're aware of are the central city properties. The ones that are more outside the central city, usually we get involved with acquisitions because they're blighted to be torn down. Do we have any rehab type projects that are, I'd ask staff, have we had conversations about going out beyond the central city for,
I
say,
think-
Maricopa
yeah.
or something?
I think the only instance that we would ever intervene outside of a very distressed neighborhood would be if it's like the one house on the block that is dragging down the entire block. I think it would have to be something that would rise to a level of this is a historic structure in Oshkosh, and if we lose it, it's going to be terrible for the neighborhood and the community as a whole. And I think that would be like the parameters maybe that would be set up for selecting a property. but typically we
Stress-
don't. Yeah.
Stressed neighborhoods are the ones where we are having the problem with the private sector not doing it. Private
Right.
sector usually takes care of most of the peripheral neighborhoods.
Would this entity or this project consider moving properties as well?
I know what you're thinking.
A large house.
That is moving.
To a better
Possible.
suited situation for a character home.
I wouldn't rule it out.
For example, like, there's two houses on Bone Street. They're ranches probably built in the 50s or 60s that are in pretty bad shape. And they're between, I'm thinking that they're between New York, I think New York, they're on the west
Lot
side.
for sale across the street, isn't
I can't tell if they're occupied or not, but they're eyesores, and it's a nice neighborhood. So to answer your question, we might acquire these. May only need a coat of paint, I don't know, but they're eyesores right now. So, on your way home, John, side heading north. One is painted green and yellow,
Okay.
sort of.
So we can do some more research based
I-
on the
I
questions
think
you
we-
asked today
Yeah.
and come back and
That'd be great.
flesh it out a little more.
Next, we have the executive director's report. Mr. Davis?
Yes, the bad news is that we got no responses for the Jefferson RFP. We're examining how we can redraft that and get it more widely distributed and maybe wait till later this spring to get more activity back for it. The little comments we've gotten back was that they are concerned about the close proximity to the Main Street commercial/bar tavern area, and how you'd be able to separate residential private uses from that type of noise or light. So we might have to look at that a little closer, as well as the condition of the street and the neighborhood across the street. So we're going to be looking at that again later this summer, but I expect we're still going to issue the RFP again this spring to see if there's more people more interested in that type of project. And if you guys have any other suggestions on that, we'd be more than happy to incorporate that into the new RFP.
What about the community garden that was there? Will they be allowed to do it this year?
We asked them to leave last year,
So-
and I expect, if we get a proposal in March or April, I would love it if they could actually start construction still in 2016. I don't want to leave that as a prospect that we wouldn't be able to do that.
Nothing from the housing authority
Nothing from the housing authority.
or cerebral palsy or anything?
We are working with the Housing Authority and Habitat on the Grove Street. And I think they're up to a couple of projects in the works right now, and that's, I know you mentioned cerebral palsy, and I thought a couple of those were going to be accessible units as
Yep.
well.
Where in Grove?
Right behind the old Mercy Hospital.
500 or 600 block.
600 block.
Next item, update on Buckstaff. You've probably read in the paper, there's a tentative agreement with that. It is all conditioned on getting 2 grants from Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, one through the RDA and one through the city. So we're needing the property owner to split that lot into 2 different pieces. And I would say we're 95% done with the actual grant application. We're just trying to get some final numbers from the demolition and asbestos contractors so that that can be submitted to WDC.
Who's the property owner?
First Merit Bank out of Ohio.
Glad you
It's a
asked.
combination, is my impression. Until it goes through the courts, that's part of the dispute as to who actually owns it.
Yeah.
John, what do they call it when you remove materials from a property? Is that called stealing?
Well,
If you don't own it?
It could be, there's one side of that argument that has to do with that, as I understand it.
But both the entities involved are parties to the agreement, so I'm not sure it matters who owns it at this point.
Right.
Both of them are agreeing to the terms and stipulations to the agreement.
If it's, the question is, who, let's develop it, then I own it. If it's, let's get the asbestos out of here, then you own it.
Yeah.
So does the city see this property reverting to ownership of the city at any point?
That is a requirement of the agreement at this point.
Very good, okay.
Actually, the RDA will take ownership of a portion of it, and the city will take ownership of a portion of it.
Based on the lot split to get to
To get to
grants.
To get 2 grants.
Got it, but it could be developed as one property, or it has to be?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It could be
Okay.
Then we could
Okay.
recombine it.
It's really just technicality to get the grants.
Yes.
Black Iron's looking at it.
Things you never see on TV.
We'd like to expand our scrap yard.
No.
They took all the scrap out of there already. Question about stealing.
Let's see, I'd move on to
Oh, sure.
Or a lot of little updates on there. Boat Works. The good news is that Fox Wisconsin Heritage Parkway has awarded the city some grant funds for a handicapped accessible canoe and kayak launch. So we'll be putting that in this spring, and we're hoping to include that as part of the ribbon cutting celebration that we're planning this spring. Morgan District, you should see actual construction on the Riverwalk taking place between the Oregon Street Bridge and Dockside Tavern. They're working on that right now. We're still working on getting the design done west of Oregon Street all the way over to Boat Works, and we're hoping to use some of that grant money and get additional grant money to continue with the Riverwalk in 16 and 17. So I'm cautiously optimistic that section of the Riverwalk will be done in the next couple of years. Morgan District and the city prepared a idle industrial site grant to WEDC to help install $375,000 worth of new private infrastructure for sewer, water, and private roads on that site. And Morgan District recently submitted a tax increment finance application for this site that the city is reviewing at this point in time. But in the last line, the owners hope to start the first phase apartments and commercial space along Oregon at the end of 2016. So a lot of things have to fall into place when it comes to the financing and the grants, but we're cautiously optimistic. And one of the developers did say that one of the commercial spaces they hope to have is a grocer. So that would be a nice addition for that neighborhood. Pioneer area, Mr. Art Dumke continues to work on that, and he basically finished all the code enforcement requirements that the city had this last fall and early winter, and he's still continuing to work on coming up with development and funding scenarios that we're working closely with him on that. The granary, if you recall, Mr. Dumke was in at the last meeting to talk about potential acquisition of the RDA land kitty corner from the granary, and he does continue to work with the city on the residential and restaurant renovation. It'll be more residential than restaurant than it had been in the past, but still wants to have that available, and we're looking at potentially even running the Riverwalk down from dockside down to the granary and across the front yard, so they'd have access to the Riverwalk as well, and kind of skirt around Sweetwater and go to a destination where users of the Riverwalk would have a likelihood of using their services. Let's see, then update on some Marion Road redevelopment projects. Anthem, that's the new building that was completed this last year that kind of has the industrial modern look. That was completed and leased up very quickly. The city is working on submitting the information to DNR for certificate of completion, and I think we're real close to having that done.
Actually, it was just hand-delivered to us this week, so we have it.
Okay.
So now we're working on closing, so transferring the property.
And Rivers 1.5, that's the building just to the west of Anthem. They started construction this past fall and hope to open in the spring. And if you recall, that includes a little park and open space area that we've set aside some land for some improvements and some public art potentially on that particular site. And access from Marion Road so people can get to the Riverwalk. Mr. Dumke still is working, Mr. Andy Dumke still has the option for the Jackson Marion parcel right there along Jackson. He's still working on specific building and site plans, but that option goes for another 6 months approximately.
Actually, the end of December.
In December.
The bank.
No, this one is the one on the riverfront.
But you're right, that's one of the potential users he's talked about.
Okay.
Water tower, engineering consultant is preparing more information on the final tower design and final site plans, so we'll bring that back to you once we get that, because that was one thing you guys wanted to see once that was developed. Hasn't been quite finished yet, but we know you have an interest in that. And then Central City Investment Strategy, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation awarded the city $50,000 grant as part of the downtown plan update, which, if you recall, will include the Buckstaff property, the Pioneer, much bigger area on the South Shore than was in previous planning, as well on the North Shore. And you'll be continued to be invited to provide input and reaction to that project. I expect the public input to continue still this spring with some plans, hopefully developed for this summer with some action by the RDA and the Plan Commission and the City Council early or late summer, early fall for that project.
It says that that a larger planning area will include the South Shore extending south to Buckstaff. Will that jump industrial properties to Buckstaff, or
Nope.
will it be all inclusive to Buckstaff?
It'll include your property. And Allrow and Buckstaff.
Your question was
Finally.
transparent.
We're in the club.
But it also includes going down a bit of Oregon, further to the south. It includes more than just 9th. So it's a bigger area on the South Shore than just the
Very good.
South Shore redevelopment area. Was mostly just along the riverfront. And then, last but not least, Mr. Burns, the owner of the property there at 9th and Main. He has reported to us that he did hire an engineer to do the survey for the property, an elevation survey for the interior building. And that engineer is supposed to draw up exterior framing plans to attach the new facade covering the northwest and south sides of the building. And he hopes to still did that this summer for construction. Exactly. So yes, we do touch bases with Mr. Burns, but the exterior still is a problem for him, as I reported to you last spring, if you recall.
Is it a problem for him based on what the requirements are to meet as far as aesthetic, or is it just like technical, structural, and like squaring issues?
Squaring issues, apparently. The building isn't square anymore outside, so he has to square it up to put the siding on.
Okay.
And there's the structural issue with the brick is in that the brick is not real structurally sound to actually support the framing. So that's been a challenge for them, is what I remember. He still wants to save the building rather than demolish it, so
I don't understand.
he used to try to save.
I know that was an old carriage works at one time. From what the museum told me, they used to build carriages there back before my time.
Yeah, he's got it totally gutted, put a new roof on it. It's ready to go interior-wise, but issues with the exterior.
Anything more, Mr. Davis?
That's all I had.
I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Adjourned.